Hey everybody, this is Reza.
This is Sandy.
Welcome back to episode 56 of the Stone Cold Sober podcast.
It's been a crazy NFL weekend. It's still going on right now, but we decided to do this because we actually got hit with a pretty interesting thing during the week.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was sort of at work and I was I was just taking a break and I was reading the news, and one of the sites that I like to read these long form articles on is The Atlantic. And this week on The Atlantic, Julie Beck in the health section wrote this article. When are you really an adult? In an age when the line between childhood and adulthood is blurrier than ever, what is it that makes people grown up? And I thought, oh my god, Reza has to read this. And I've actually been sending this article around to a ton of people. And it's definitely been a conversation starter. Because everyone's trying to, come up with that sexy, one-line definition of, oh, I'm an adult, or this person's an adult because of X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And then when you start to really get into it, you're like, well, is it just one thing? Is it even a whole host of things?
Right. It's a super interesting article. I read over it yesterday with Elena, and we definitely were talking about it for a good bit. Just like, is there something because kind of like what you said, it's like there seems to be not just one thing that you can really, identify as being something that makes you an adult, but it seems like there are a couple of things that are major influences that can make one more adult-like and force you into adulthood.
Right. So when you think of, the transition to adulthood, usually it's a couple of things, right? It's getting a job. Right. Moving away from your parents, getting married, and having kids.
Yeah.
And you would think that, for the most of the history, that this is pretty much what we've been told.
Right.
What's interesting is most of history hasn't been that way. It turns out that after World War II, mm-hmm. the economic boom in America sort of allowed anyone to get a job.
Yeah, exactly.
And so all you're thinking of, all right, everyone's coming back from the war. The economy's at an all-time high. It's just moving, the engines are red hot. There's jobs everywhere. You can buy a house anywhere. And you couple that with the social pressure of not allowing people to live together before they're married, and then our kids are, now you're getting jobs, we're getting married, we're having kids, we're cohabitating. It all sort of happened very quickly.
Right.
And I'm finding it out that, okay, if baby boomers were afforded this ability or sort of these circumstances to grow up and become quote unquote an adult, then these are the parents to our parents.
Yeah, exactly.
And they would have instilled in our parents sort of that same line of thinking.
Right.
And I think that we are the last generation to be taught that, because after the baby boomers and they're sort of able to secure all this, and then our parents are somewhat able to secure most of this, that our generation right now is sort of reverting back to the mean of how history's always been.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that later, but sort of just keep in mind that, and I guess we will all kind of feel it, right? The four major markers are getting a job, moving away from your parents, getting married, and having kids. But it's, I guess, we're finding out now that, people are taking not too long, but people are taking longer to acquire all these. And it's just, there's that pressure, right, from our parents and maybe our grandparents to be like, what are you doing? Why are you not, quote unquote, settling down, moving on to the next phase of your life, becoming that adult?
Yeah.
And so let's start figuring it out, right? Is it just those markers? But, does age alone make an adult? Right now in America, 21 is sort of the de facto adulthood thing, right?
In a sense, at least.
In a sense, because what? You're 21, you can drink.
Right. When you're 21, you drink. That feels like the last social marker at which you're able to do whatever you want, right?
Right.
The last time, it's the last like age that you need to hit in order to basically go out and, you know, you could drink. That's the big thing. You're able to buy alcohol, you can drink, and nobody can tell you that you can't. There's no other really real age that you need to hit unless you're trying to like run for president or something at 35.
Right. Because
before that though, there's 18.
18, right? So you can what? You can vote at 18.
You can vote at 18. You can smoke at 18. You can
smoke.
You can
Join the military.
Join the military, but you can also that's also the general age of consent, and that is also the age at which you'll be tried as an adult if you commit a crime.
Yeah, like automatically an adult, as opposed to pushing to be tried as an adult.
Right.
Now, so all right, well, I mean that's crazy in its own right, where you can't drink until you're 21, but you can die for your country at you're 18. Like,
yeah, it's the argument that I always hear.
Yeah.
Then there's also the biological argument of your brain's still developing, and if you're drinking too much at 18, you can really hurt. You can affect your brain.
Right.
We won't get into that. I don't know enough about that, but even so. Right. If you can make the decision to at least die for your country, you might think, well, you know, I can make the adult decision then that
I want to drink.
Right? I'll take the repercussions.
So you were talking about consent. You're allowed to watch adult movies at 17, and kids can hold a job as young as 14 in certain states.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, like we started at you can't rent a car by yourself until you're 25.
Yeah.
Just so we're clear, because it always used to be a pain in the ass to try and rent a car. So, okay, so we've got a couple of major markers, right? 18 is the big one. 21's a big one.
Yeah, I feel like 21's kind of the socially accepted one, right?
Right.
In my mind, at least. 18, you graduate from high school, but I think people still feel like you're kind of young at 18. Yeah, most people go to college. Maybe not most people, but a lot of people go to college, and you're generally not getting a job at which you can sustain yourself effectively at 18.
Right.
And that typically comes after college, so at 21, 22 years old.
So 21 is sort of the de facto for now. You're an adult. Like when somebody says 21, you're like, all right. Like on some level, subconsciously, you're like, all right, this kid's an adult, right?
Right.
Like you're no longer a 21-year-old kid. But then you think to yourself, well, is that enough? Like, is age and sort of the biological maturity, is that it? Is 21 when you become an adult? And we found out that, you know, it used to be sexual maturity was something that they used to measure an adult. So if we went way back, you know, puberty can start anywhere between 8 and 13 for girls and 9 and 14 for boys. And you're thinking to yourself, well, we're definitely moving away from that as a marker for adulthood. Like, this isn't Game of Thrones, you know. Arya and Sansa aren't like 8 and 13 in the book. Like, we're way beyond that. So that's probably not the best marker.
Yeah.
And then, but then if we move to something like bone structure, and you're talking about skeletal development, you know, we found out that the adult version of certain parts of your body don't mature until very late. So they're saying that today, dental and wrist x-rays are used to determine the age of children, especially refugee children.
Yeah, refugees, which they don't know their age, yeah.
But even that isn't the most reliable, right? So I'm trying to strike out like our sexual maturity in regards to puberty is not a good marker, right? And then now the author Julie Beck is saying, all right, skeletal maturity, it's too wild. You're not really sure. You know, some people are saying, well, they're saying signs that the final bone in the body to mature is actually the collarbone.
Right.
And that doesn't happen until 25 to 35.
Right.
So 35 feels a little late. If we're trying to come up with like the end all be all, this is what an adult is. Like you would think that, wow, 35, at least it's a lot later than when you thought it was.
Yeah.
Right? Because if 21 is what I'm led to believe, and now you're pumping it out all the way out to 35, you've increased that timeline by 66%.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's something people are ready for.
Yeah. I mean, so I guess what I would ask you is, when it comes to an adult, like what do you think it makes somebody an adult?
Well,
just on like a very broad,
all right. So before we even start to continue analyzing this,
mm-hmm.
I think it's being able to take care of yourself financially.
Yeah.
I think it's about being okay and comfortable with who you are. And I think it's being responsible for your own actions.
Yeah.
Those are the three things that I got.
Yeah, I can absolutely get behind that. I think financially responsible for yourself, and being responsible enough to make very hard decisions, to do things that you don't want to do. There's a huge sense of responsibility, I think, that comes on, that makes somebody an adult. So if you try to bring in somebody else and say, well, you need to take care of somebody else, I think that can boost you and push you into adulthood and force you to make those decisions. But I think the being responsible enough to take care of oneself is the big thing.
Right. So there's this little anecdote throughout the article, and I really encourage everybody to read this article. It's on the Atlantic. It is long,
but it is very long. We'll link it, and the descriptions on both Shout Engine, iTunes, and YouTube.
Yeah. Again, the article is "When Are You Really an Adult?" It's published in the Atlantic. The author is Julie Beck. Shout out to Julie Beck for an awesome article this week. So with regards to the financial independence, right?
Mm-hmm.
She pulls out this anecdote because when she wrote this article, she sent out like a blast to all of her readers to see what they thought when they became an adult. This guy, Stephen Grape, said, "I don't think I've become an adult just yet. I'm a 21-year-old American student who lives almost entirely off of my parents' welfare. For the last several years, I felt a pressure. It might be a biological or a social pressure to get out from under the yoke of my parents' financial assistance. I feel that only when I'm able to support myself financially will I be a true adult. Some of the traditional markers of adulthood, turning 18, turning 21, have come and gone without me feeling any more adulty, and I don't think that marriage would make me feel more grown up unless it was accompanied by financial independence. Money really matters because past a certain age, it is the main determiner of what you can and cannot do. And I guess to me, the freedom to choose all, quote, the things in life, unquote, in your life is what makes someone an adult." So I guess that's one aspect of it.
Yeah.
The financial independence. And I liked how Stephen Grapes in this anecdote called out it's the freedom to choose what you want to do and what you cannot do.
Right.
Right. So if we go back a little bit to the biological markers, right? So we've covered sexual maturity in terms of puberty. We've covered skeletal things. But then what about like cultural transitions? You've got bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs at like 13, at 12. You've got sweet 16s. You've got quinceañeras at 15. And socially, this is like the traditional, you are a boy, now you are a man. You are a girl, now you are a woman. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are just saying like, or we take it away from that cultural, like sort of, that cultural aspect of it, and then we throw in high school graduations at 18.
Right. Turning in the tassel.
You turn that tassel.
And that's supposed to be, flip the switch. You're now graduated. You're now an adult. Go on and do great things.
How did you feel when you graduated high school?
I didn't feel anything. I obviously was graduating, and that was about it.
Yeah.
On to college. I mean, that was the
graduated thing for me. At the University of Delaware. I remember being the very last person to get off the stage. Everyone was cheering for me what I thought because everyone liked me. Turns out they were cheering for me because I was the last one and we were finally done.
Yeah, finally over.
Yeah, so that was a funny little moment.
Yeah, that's the. It's there. I feel like there's never an instant switch. Whenever you have a birthday, a lot of the times people ask you a question like, "How do you feel? Do you feel any different?" I'm like, no. There's never really a switch. There's always a gradient. It's like it's a really subtle transition that happens whether you change as a person or you see other people changing. It's almost like weight loss, right? Like you might see somebody today and then you won't see them for another 2 years, and all of a sudden they're 50 pounds lighter or 50 pounds heavier. Like you see that instantly to you. It's like at one point you were this and another point you're that, but unless you're if you're spending time with that person, if you are that person every day, it's really hard to notice the transition unless you look at those pictures. Like, when you're, day to day, you don't notice the difference, the transitions. And I feel like that's the way it's going to be when it comes to change, going from a child to an adult. There are just little things that change over time, and that will be the transition itself.
Yeah. You were talking about a while ago, 18, was it 18 or 21 that you were automatically tried as an adult? It's 18, you said,
18,
right?
18, yeah, 18.
And so they're saying that, question of maturity is also dependent on the task at hand. According to one of these guys, his last name is Steinberg. He goes, for example, with their fully developed logical reasoning, this guy Steinberg sees no reason 16-year-olds shouldn't be able to vote, even if other aspects of their brain are still maturing. You don't need to be 6 feet tall to reach a shell that's 5 feet off the ground. So it's like, okay, so we're trying to figure out, so biologically, there's not a set marker where you just sort of, like you said, evolve, right? Like overnight. Like, all right, you used to be this, and now you're totally this. There's this, and there's there was this, there is now that. So it looks like, from initial review, biologically, there isn't that marker. So we can't really look to that as the end-all, be-all answer, right?
Yeah.
For whether or not we become an adult. So then we move forward to sort of, I guess it's more of the this prolonged adolescent mindset that we might have, and it's that transitional time of trying to figure out, are you an adult? And I'm flipping through, I'm trying to find the next thing. All right, so the big three. So this is where throughout this adolescent period between 18 and 25, which is what it stands as right now, currently the big three criteria for becoming an adult are the following things: taking responsibility for yourself, making independent decisions, and becoming financially independent. So that is let's just say that's the boilerplate one that everyone sort of has to look at.
Right.
But then depending, right, on cultures, in China, for example, people highly value being able to financially support their parents. And in India, people value the ability to keep their family physically safe. So if we take away, right, all of the other cultural things that are add-ons to this, and we try and keep it as broad as possible, what do you think so far about the big three? Again, they would be taking responsibility for yourself, making independent decisions, and then becoming financially independent. What are your thoughts on that?
So that's the big thing. Like it seems like, because as I read the article, there are a lot of differences in terms of what we might consider an adult today and what we would have considered an adult like 50 years ago or 500 years ago. And I thought it was kind of interesting, or I really enjoyed the way they brought in the different cultural aspects to it, because I was thinking about, people that I know that are from India or China or even like the Middle East where my mom's from, or from Africa where my dad's from. Each culture has different responsibilities for each person. And it also depends on which child you are, as in, are you the first child? Are you the second child?
That is a great point. Are you
female? Because if you're a female, in some cultures, if you're like 14, 15, 16 years old, you're an adult. You can get married. You can have kids. And so, you have your kids and you're technically an independent adult in those cultures. But in the US here, that certainly doesn't make you an adult. You're still immature in our eyes. And maybe that's dependent on our schooling system and whatnot. In turn, you're kind of forced to go to school until you graduate, hit 12th grade, you graduate, you're 18 at that point. That's kind of, what we arbitrarily put our adulthood line. I guess, yeah, there's no real good markers in my mind that makes one an adult in terms of age or even biologically. I feel like the concept of adulthood is something that we really just, humans invented ourselves. It's just a word that we've used. And I feel like when it comes to adulthood, kind of like what we said earlier, it's a point where you can be independent. Obviously, you don't have to be completely independent. It's not like you can't depend on others for certain things, but it's just a point where you can be very responsible, independent, and make reasonable decisions for yourself and to understand the consequences. Now, I guess there would still be the question as to whether, what about people that maybe have mental deficiencies or people that have drug addictions and they make very poor choices? Aren't they adults? You could be 50 years old and be making terrible choices for your life, but you would still call them an adult, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So
but that's a choice, though, right? Like, as an adult, you made that choice.
Yeah, I generally would assume that these people had come to this point in their life based on understanding the consequences of the actions that they're taking. And I feel like that's the big thing, you know. At 13, 14 years old, you know, your parents tell you that you need to stay at home and study instead of going out to a party because it's good for you, you know. And they tell you not to, you know, drink and smoke and do things like that because it's good for you. And you, as a child, might not really get that decision to say, like, you know, it's good for me. Like, I know it's good for me, but you kind of don't. You'll say it, but you really don't know what's really good for you. And that's why you have that person to tell you what to do or guide you. Right. But as an adult,
they're able to see the forest from the trees a little bit more clearly.
Right. And that's not to say that all adults really can't see the consequences of certain actions. Like,
that's also true.
You imagine that they are responsible enough. Yeah, they're better equipped to deal with it, to deal with mistakes or to deal with their actions or deal with things that life throws at them.
Yeah, no, I would agree. What's interesting about the big three, you know, the things people rank as, you know, what they most need to be grown up, you know, taking responsibility for yourself, making independent decisions, and becoming financially independent, two are internal, very subjective things.
Yeah.
Right? We can somewhat measure when you are financially independent. It just depends on what marker you want to use, right?
Right.
Is it above the poverty line? Is it making, you know, 6 figures a year? Why 6 figures? Why not this or that? Like, all this stuff. But what about taking responsibility for yourself and then making independent decisions? How is it even possible to even measure something like that? Is that just something that you would have to look at yourself? Like, how do me judge you, Reza, on whether or not you're taking responsibility for yourself or if you're making independent decisions?
Yeah, I hear you on that one. It's very hard. Like, there's no real answer for it. There's no measure like that says, oh yeah, you know, you've hit this criteria, you're an adult, like you're making these responsible decisions. Obviously you can judge other people, but you know, your judgment of me or my judgment of you are going to be two very different things. So, you know, for me, like, so for me looking at you, you know, you've had, you know, a job for the last, you know, 4 years in, you know, in industry, you're making money, you have connections, and
Jesus, you're making me sound old already. God damn it.
you have your own apartment. You're completely independent. Now me on the other hand, I'm still in grad school. I don't make very much money. If I decided but yet I do have a fiance. So that's, right. You know, there are a few things that some people would put, you know, in higher priority over other people. And some people would say that, you know, you need to be married and you need to have kids. And I think I'm pretty well along the way to making that complete. I don't have a job yet. Well, you know, job and industry, at least, you know, I still get paid for what I do, but I don't have like a, you know, a full paying job where I have to be there from 9 to 5 every day, something like that. That will be coming in a couple of years, but these are you know, that's the decision that I made. And I think it's a very adult decision. I certainly wouldn't call it childish or anything like that.
Right.
But, you know, I'm living at home right now with my mom. And, you know, that's also a decision that I made independently.
Right. So the subjective nature of that makes it hard for us to use it as a global marker, right?
Right.
Because, like you said, and it was a great point about your fiance, and it's certain people would value different things higher than the others. So, you know, right then and there, it's already bad to use it as a marker, because if the marker is subjective, then it's really not a good marker for us. I mean, it's definitely a great start, right? You know, being financially responsible, taking responsibility for your actions. This is all what we've been sort of told as we've grown up, that these are things that adults do. You know, you know, grow up, take responsibility for what you just did. And he goes, oh, okay, you know, it's sort of how we've been wired to think about adulthood. But I guess it's just as we grow older and older, we realize that if everyone's playing and measuring different sort of things, then that doesn't mean that one person necessarily is more adult than the other person, right?
Right.
Like, can we, just because we're going after different things right now, like that shouldn't like disqualify you from like, oh, you know what? Yeah, you're not doing that yet. You haven't done that yet. Nah, I can't call you an adult.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you on that one, because I wouldn't say that I'm more adult than you or you're more adult than me. We both have different priorities in terms of, or I don't even want to call it priorities. I mean, I just kind of had things fall into my lap, at least when it comes to, my fiance. It's not like I went, like we talked about this last week on the podcast. It's not like I was actively looking for a fiance. Like I wasn't,
you weren't walking around with a sign. Fiance wanted.
I was not looking around for a sign. I was not walking around with the sign. I wasn't actively dating. I just hit up an old friend, saw how she was doing. We ended up, hanging out, and we both liked each other. We both liked talking, and it just so happened that we both thought, one another was physically attractive enough to the point that we decided that, it'd be worth dating. And, that went on for 3 years, and then I finally proposed to her. But even without her, I would still call myself an adult. Even if I was single right now, I'm in grad school. Like I said, I make my own decisions. I understand the consequences of those actions and those decisions that I've made. I fully understood the consequences of going to grad school at 22 years old, where I decided, you know what, I'm not going to get a job. I'm going to go to grad school. I'm going to spend another 4, 5, 6 years in school training myself, so that way I can get a job out of grad school doing something that I really love, and hopefully making a lot more money than I would have 10 years from now than I would have if I just got out with a bachelor's. So I think in my mind, we see the things that people do, and other people will kind of judge them for it. But I don't think it's just like you said, it's kind of subjective, like what some other people might see from you as to whether that's an adult thing or not. So like some people might see you as being single and not married or not having kids and say, well, you're not an adult yet, or maybe not the word adult, but still childish in some sense. Mm-hmm. But some people might see me as not being married and not having kids and seeing that as childish too. I feel like that might be older people in my mind, like at least a different generation. I could be completely wrong on that one, but I don't know. I mean, I think that there are just a lot of different things that go into it. Earlier, what I was saying that I feel like there are certain things that, like when it comes to being independent, and I also mentioned if you have somebody who's dependent on you, that can kind of force you into adulthood early. And so we talked, like in the article, they actually mentioned cases where, maybe somebody has a child at like 16 years old. All of a sudden, you're responsible for a baby at 16. That's a lot of work. Like in this country, in this, this day and age, you're still in high school, and all of a sudden you're responsible for feeding another human being, for, being awake 24/7 to address the needs of that child. And many times that you're not capable of doing that completely by yourself. So I also wouldn't say that somebody at 16 is really an adult if they have a baby. But, what about somebody who at 12 or 13 years old has both parents died, That person all of a sudden,
but that's responsibility though, right?
Yeah, it's responsibility, but it really forces you to make decisions that you otherwise wouldn't have had to make, or that you shouldn't have to make. At least what we might think of, not nice. Someone shouldn't have to make these tough decisions to get a job at like 13 to feed your siblings. And it's things that you'll like hear for like maybe from athletes, where even if they do have parents that are around, they don't make enough money. So the kid has to do some type of work after school to help support the family. And I just feel like when you're exposed to that at a young age, it can really kind of force you to grow up really fast. Maybe you still wouldn't call them an adult, maybe because there's the physical differences. You're 4'11", you're not like 6 foot, you're still maybe not fully comprehending all the consequences to your different actions, but you are also understanding enough of money and how it affects you and a family, and how if you decide you don't want to work today, then you might not be able to put food on the dinner table next week.
Right. So that's an interesting thing, what you just brought up. Kids and taking care of, or not only just taking care of kids, but taking care of parents, right? So of all of adulthood's many responsibilities, sort of the one that's often brought up the most is parenthood, right? And they're saying that, this is the newfound responsibility for someone else, not just yourself, as the defining factor that takes precedence over the big three.
Yeah.
Which which seems like it is. And you were absolutely right to bring up cases of either teen pregnancies where people are having kids a lot younger. Then you'd have to really ask yourself the question, are they an adult? Because in one sense they are, because they are taking care of someone or someone else, right? Someone that's completely dependent on them to raise them so that they can survive.
Mm-hmm.
But then do you bring in this social sort of judgment that comes along with teen pregnancies and says, oh, but you were a child, you made a mistake, just because teen pregnancies aren't seen as something that's really like this quote unquote the smartest thing to do in life. Does that negate anything at all?
I don't know.
Like, okay, let's just say that I'm a high schooler, and all of a sudden, I get a girl pregnant. So now, and we decided to keep it, and the baby is born. So I don't know what's a good age to make this feel more real for me.
We'll say 17. Say it again.
Let's say 17. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, perfect.
Let's say 17. Okay, so now I'm 17 years old, and I've got a kid, and obviously not the best thing to happen. There's definitely a lot of studies out there that show that your life's potential really gets affected when you have a kid early, because the amount of flexibility that you might have once had is just no longer there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a massive resource, not suck, that's a bad word for it, but it just takes a lot more resources away from whatever you wanted to do, and now it's all on this kid.
Yeah.
So, okay. I would argue that I am an adult at that point, because I made an adult decision, right, to engage in an adult act, sex, and then to live with the known consequences of this action, which is pregnancy leading to a child. I would argue that I am an adult, even though I am 16. It's just that I was forced to take responsibility much earlier than I anticipated, but because I am willing to take those responsibilities, that I have reached an adulthood. It's just that my age is not traditional. What are your thoughts on that?
I say fair enough, but, and maybe this is not the best question, because what I want to ask though is, do you think that 17-year-old you truly did understand the consequences of those actions? Like, do you think you at 17 years old said, okay, we're going to have this, we're going to follow up with this pregnancy and have the baby? The reason why I say it might not be fair is because I'm not sure if everyone, can really anticipate how much work it is to have a baby.
Oh, I don't think anyone.
And how dramatic of a change it will be on your life. Because you at 17 having a baby, all of a sudden, now you have to finish high school and take care of a baby at the same time. You have to figure out how it's possible that you can go to college and still have this baby. And if you want to stay with the mother and be in a relationship with her, you have to figure out ways that you can do that together. Because many times it's going to be unlikely that you'll be able to, travel abroad and go to another school somewhere else.
Oh, sure.
And when I say abroad, I don't mean like another country, but like even in the same, in the US, we live in Pennsylvania. You went to school in New York City. Would that have been possible if you had a baby?
Let's put it this way. Not so much the, understanding at the time of me having sex and then realizing, oh, I don't know if I'm ready for this.
Mm-hmm.
We're past that now. I am actually raising this kid. I have decided to take responsibility.
Okay, yeah.
And I am taking care of this child.
So I guess I can say I agree with you. I think it'll be a case. It's a a case by case basis with that, because there are plenty of people that might not. But assuming that you are responsible enough to say, hey, I'm going to get a job, I'm going to take care of this baby, I'm going to do everything that I need to in order to take care of this baby, as well as take care of myself. Yeah, I mean, somewhat what I said earlier, certain things like this can really propel you into a situation where you can generally be called an adult. You're making these really tough decisions, not just for you, but for somebody else. And if you're making good decisions, keeping that in mind, then I think that can really push you into adulthood really fast.
Yeah, I think so far under this hypothetical, if I got a girl pregnant and I decided, you know what, I'm staying and we're raising this kid, like once that decision has been made, and not so much like, oh, I made the decision, I'm gonna do it, but then I like back out later, right?
Right.
Like this is the full commit. I'm all in. I'm gonna do it. I think that makes you an adult regardless of what age you're at, because it's just one of those like massive responsibilities that you're undertaking. And I'm not. This is, I guess, I'm also caveating it with the fact that it depends on whether or not you succeed or fail. I'm trying to figure out if I am doing that or not. Because, like I said, you can say you're gonna do it, but if you do it and then you massively fail, like that's the life of somebody else, right? That's at stake.
Right.
Is it just deciding that you are doing it that makes you the adult?
Tough question. Don't know if there's a good answer for it.
Yeah. Like, so here's another little anecdote that's pretty interesting. For a long time, I've been waiting for that, quote, I am an adult, unquote, feeling. This person's 27 years old, married, living on my own, and employed as a manager at a successful hotel company. I expected all of these things, age, marriage, career, to trigger the feeling. Looking back, I think I was asking the wrong question. I don't think I spent a lot of time as a child or teenager. I have worked since I was 13, and I worked with other kids my age. Our parents were immigrants who made little more than us. We were our family's translators since childhood. Utilities and banks have heard my prepubescent voice as my mother and father, etc. I think for some of us, we reached adulthood before we realized it. So what's interesting about this example is, are we asking the right question, right?
Right.
Is it more when are you no longer a child, as opposed to when are you an adult? Because that way it might encompass a couple of things. It could be you're on the younger age, you're on the younger side of this age spectrum, and you're a teenager and you just had a kid, and you're deciding to raise this kid, and you're going to do a damn good job raising that kid.
Right.
But then on the opposite end is, what if when it's time for us to take care of our parents in old age, right? And the roles reverse, where we become the parent and they become the child. That's also another major moment where a lot of people are like, I went through adulthood, feeling one way, and then when my mom or my dad got sick and I had to take care of them in that capacity, that's when everything changed. That also seems to be an interesting one.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's also a good point. I like the idea of kind of, rather than asking when are you an adult, maybe you should consider both. When are you an adult and when are you no longer a child? Because we tend to think of these as two different things. There's adult, there's child, and there's adult. And maybe I really like the idea of it being a spectrum rather than just those two. There's kind of a, young adult, there's adolescence, there's, teenager, things like that, because you kind of slide along the spectrum, and certain decisions that you make, some might see, or you even yourself might see those decisions as being childish or something a teen might do, something like that. But overall, like, is it kind of the average of all those decisions that makes you fit into one category? I don't know.
Right.
I think there are a number of things that have to really be considered. I still think that age has to play some factor in it. I think biological maturity has to play some factor as well in terms of brain development and brain function. And then there's always the maturity level. Like, how mature are you? Are you making smart decisions in life for yourself or for others? I think that there are a lot of factors. Like, it was like, the big three: financially independent and such. But even moving away from that a bit, I don't even think you have to be financially, in my opinion, you don't have to necessarily be financially independent to be an adult.
Wait, you just said you don't have to be financially independent to be an adult?
I don't think so. Not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, even like what we were saying earlier, like if you were to have a kid or you're forced to take responsibility for your parents as a, a younger person, doesn't that kind of thrust you a bit into adulthood where you're no longer like, if I can't go out, if I'm 21 years old and I can't go out to a bar anymore because I'm responsible for a child, or I'm responsible for somebody who can't take care of themselves, or I need to study for exams or something like that. Like, those are adult decisions to make. Those are hard choices that you have to make. And if you decide that you're going to do those things, you probably understand what it means.
I agree with you.
I think that you can live at home with your parents and be 25 years old and I'm still an adult. Like, right? There's still some semblance of age that has to play a role, because if you're 40 years old and you live at home with your parents in their basement, I'm not calling you a child. If you're homeless on the streets because of terrible decisions that you made and you're 50 years old, I'm not calling you a child either. I think that you're an adult at that point. So, even if you're not financially responsible, I think that it can be a factor. I think it's a factor that maybe we socially put in, but in terms of the word adult, like whether you're an adult, I don't think financial responsibility necessarily is a requirement.
Maybe it's the taking responsibility of whatever situation you're in.
Yeah,
that makes you more of the adult.
Yeah, I think that what was his name? Something Grapes. I think when he's discussed how money is your key to like everything. If you have money, you're able to do something, or you're not able to do something. And when it comes to responsibility and being able to take care of yourself, I mean, if you have money, you can feed yourself. If you have money, you can put a roof over your head. And if you don't have the money, then you're going to be depending on somebody else to do it for you. But like I said before, I don't necessarily think dependence in many capacities necessarily forces you to no longer be qualified or classified as an adult, right?
Yeah, I think. Let me see what your thoughts are on this. Like, you just said that if somebody is like 40s and homeless, that you still wouldn't call them a child. And I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that I would call them a child, but is there a part of it where it's like the I guess whether or not you get the title of adult or child is how much basically responsibility you're taking for every action that you take. So what I mean by that is, if you are, like, I'm not going to sit here and call you personally a child because you're living at home, but it's also because I know that you're not lazy. Like, you're working towards something bigger.
Right. There's a reason for why I'm at home, at least.
Exactly. This is all a reason.
Yeah.
And I know that because you're taking responsibility for this, and you're doing what it takes to get to the next level, that this is just all temporary.
Right.
So that's why you are not a child. But if somebody is just, say, living every day at home in their parents' basement, and they're just playing video games all day, and they're not, out there working, and they're not getting a job, then I would call you a child.
I don't know if I would necessarily use the word child, or I think that's why I was saying I think that there has to be some incorporation of the actual physical age of that person.
Well, I'm talking about someone like how do we get? All right, let's get weird. Let's just say someone our age.
Mm-hmm.
24, 25, 26. You're at home. You're not doing anything. You're just chilling every day. To me, I'm not here to try and convince you of this.
Yeah. No.
But in my mind, someone who wasn't out there trying to either find work or become financially independent is a child in my eyes. It's, you rely on other people to take care of you. As opposed to, I don't rely on anyone else. I take care of myself. I don't need anybody else I don't need other people's resources to take care of me.
That's a good Yeah, I hear you. I do hear you.
Yeah, it's just a thought.
I know. Yeah, no, it's a good thought. It's a really good thought. It's hard, like, because I still feel like that person should, or at least does, have an understanding as to they probably recognize that they're lazy, and they understand that, like, they're taking advantage of other people's willingness to support them. Like, I guess for me, like,
so you're saying it's sort of that higher level thinking, right? Like that they understand that they're taking advantage of other people, and because they're doing it and realizing it, that they are an adult.
I think so. At least, so then there is always that question: is what if somebody is mentally challenged and doesn't recognize it? Do you call them a child then?
Right.
Or do you really even try to put a classification on it? Is it unfair to do it because they might not, they don't have the capacity to really understand it?
Right.
I don't know. I probably wouldn't,
Yeah, that's
different, right?
There's people much smarter than us thinking about that.
Yeah.
Because like I have no idea how that sort of classification comes into play.
Right.
When someone just isn't capable.
Yeah.
I guess the whole point of the conversation that we've been having is just, is it possible to have that end all be all definition of adulthood? I just don't think there is. Which kind of, is implied in the article that it wasn't going to happen, but we're smart enough to think that we gave it the old college try.
I think it's a good discussion. I really like this article because I think it really fits with the theme of the podcast very well. While we may not discuss it necessarily, out in the open, the general theme of the podcast is just kind of, growing up, being young adults, and, transitioning between being a child, somebody who's in high school or college and dependent on their parents, and, growing up and making smart decisions, for work or for school or socially, things like that. And, just being able to actually openly discuss that it was I thought it was a really good spark for conversation, and I think plenty of people will have, or people that will listen to this, I think will consider it and maybe discuss it with other people. You don't necessarily have to read the article, but I think it's a really good read, and I would definitely recommend it. It is a long article, but I think I think plenty of people would enjoy it.
So, looking back now after having discussed this, has your views or definitions on adulthood changed at all? Or are you still sticking with what you said in the beginning?
I think they changed it a little bit, yeah, at least. I mean, even what you had said about being a 17-year-old and having a child, you can make all the right decisions. And I think that at that point, I mean, that's why it's very objective. You can make all the, quote, right decisions, what I might see as being the right decisions that one should make in order to take care of yourself and the family that you're building. And I feel like at that point, then, yeah, you can be classified as an adult. You understand the decisions that you're making. I think in terms of, my thoughts changed a bit because I also had financially responsible as one of the requirements at the very beginning. But then when I consider like the homeless people, the lazy people, I feel like some of them do understand the decisions that they're making, and you don't have to be like, as long as you're aware of the decisions that you've made and how it affects your financial independence, I feel like then at that point you are also making an adult decision to, lay at home in your parents' basement playing video games all day, or, sitting in a crack den, smoking crack all day. Maybe that's not so much the dream. Maybe not the latter's the dream, but the first one could be the dream. Right. It's a dream for some people. Yeah. But that's kind of why I feel like, if it's a dream for some people, then, I guess go ahead. That's your adult decision that you've made. You want to,
right? This is what you want to do.
You want to smoke crack all day. That's on you.
Far be it from me to tell you what to do with your time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, how about you?
I think for me, the financial independence part is still a really big thing. Okay. I think being able to take care of yourself financially and not relying on other people's money, because that's really the only marker that we have in this world, for like the only marker that is universally accepted, right? As sort of something that I can use and barter with.
Yeah.
the fact that I've got my own money to play around with, to me, is a very big indicator of that.
Mm-hmm.
I also am thinking, and I think my thinking has changed on just responsibility of others, but not just kids, right? It's just understanding what consequences your actions have and doing them with that in mind. So it might be, having a kid when you're younger and being thrust in a situation like that, like you were forced to grow up faster. If I'll sit here in front of you right now and just be brutally honest with you and say that I don't think that I'm an adult yet. I think that there's still things out there that I need to accomplish before I could confidently look myself in the mirror and say, I'm looking at an adult right now.
Interesting.
And I think part of it is, we're at a point in our lives right now where you start to build relationships with other people. And until I can prove to myself that I can have healthy relationships with other people in like a romantic sense, that, that's still something that I am very much an adolescent in. I've definitely had relationships and adult relationships with people, but I don't think I'm anywhere near ready to say, oh, I know how to spend the rest of my life with somebody. Like that concept, I totally understand. I'm ready for, I don't think I am ready for it yet. I think it's also because of the people that I've met, where none of them have really spoken to me like, you know what? Yeah, I can hitch my wagon to you for the quote unquote the rest of my life. And I think that's going to be something that I'm adding to my list of just, being like sharing a life with somebody. Now that's super subjective, right? Because a lot of people might go out there and say, well, I'm financially responsible and independent. I take, full responsibility for all my actions. I just don't want to be with anybody else. Like I just want to live the rest of my life by myself, like alone. And I wouldn't say that you're any less of an adult. I just think for me personally, I'm not going to be able to look at myself fully as an adult until I'm in a long-term, stable, committed relationship.
Interesting. I see. I don't agree with that, but that's me.
Yeah, no, that's totally, yeah.
Because I just don't, I see those different markers as being super, super subjective. And because there are plenty of people that are much older and they make the conscious decision to not want to be in a relationship. Maybe some of them don't make that conscious decision, and that's something that's a huge gap in their lives. I still see them as being absolutely grown adults.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with those people. I don't think that it's really hard because it's a really large and broad word that we use to classify people. I'm looking at like Wikipedia, for example, right now, and there's different classifications of what one might call an adult, and we touched on like all of these already. But there's like there's biological adulthood, and that's when somebody has reached their sexual maturity. But then we also have the human concept, the human context of adult, which has meanings associated with social and legal concepts. So then when you refer to somebody as a legal adult, that's somebody who's reached the age of maturity, which is, in America at least, 18 years old.
Okay.
But I think the social and cultural ones, which I don't actually see, I see the social, but maybe not cultural, but those are kind of lumped together, I imagine. But the social and cultural are also huge elements because in other cultures, you're an adult when you're the head of the household.
Yeah.
And you can be the head of the household at 18 years old, or you might be the head of the household at, 45 years old.
Yeah.
That's a big range. And
it absolutely is.
So when we refer to an adult, maybe like, in generally right now, we're talking about it from a number of different angles that we've kind of combined. And we would say, is one an adult? And I guess when I say, I feel like you're an adult because you are financially responsible. You're able to take care of yourself. You understand the consequences of your own actions. On top of that, you are the legal adult. You are a biological adult. Because you're missing the romantic aspect of it. Maybe that's part of the social and cultural thing for you. And that could be a major influence on that. but I feel like you've hit some of the bigger ones for me. And I feel like, well, at that point, you know, the lacking of one's particular area doesn't necessarily negate the other, the positives, the inclusion of the others, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. I think there's, maybe it's when I say, being in a relationship with somebody, it's not so much to just be with somebody. I think it's proving emotional maturity. Mm-hmm. I think that's more of the angle I'm looking for.
I feel
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, It's easy to just like be with people. It's harder to be with somebody, like in a much more, arguably a much more intimate context than just, you know, sort of a physical relationship with somebody.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Do you think that it won't be until the point that you're in a committed relationship long term that you can say that you've proved to yourself that you've reached that level? Or do you think that you could, like right now, if you met the right person, do you think you could have that relationship?
Oh, so you're saying, like, am I waiting to, like, is this the last piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, because it's not like you're single, or at least I don't see it as you're being single as for a lack of trying, or not lack of trying, but for a lack of ability to have a long-term committed relationship, but just being picky, and which you absolutely should be, to find the right person that you do want to spend the rest of your life with.
See, you just saying the rest of your life just got me really scared.
All right, fair enough. There we go.
No, and I think that's one of those moments, right? It's like, why are you scared? What about that scares you? And do you have a good enough reason to be scared of something like this? Or is it just some thing that you've experienced maybe once in your childhood that you thought, oh, I don't know if this is going to be the right thing for me, right? I'm still trying to figure all this stuff out. I think if I can not sort of have my first thought be, oh, I don't know about that. When you bring up like the rest of your life, I think that'll be a moment where I have turned the page from an emotional maturity level. I think that's, yeah, you know what? I want to throw that in too. You know what? It's a grab bag at this point. Yeah.
It can be whatever you want.
Everyone on the boat, guys. Everyone on the boat. Yeah, so there's financial independence. There is taking responsibility for your actions. Definitely responsibility for others. In addition to and including all of the biological things that you were talking about. Mm-hmm. As some maybe more of a softer one. I'm not saying like I'm viewing a 13-year-old, but I mean if a 13-year-old has a kid and is taking care of the kid, like they're arguably doing more than I am. So I don't think there's like there's not the super sexy like end all be all label that I was looking for.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely throwing in the emotional maturity of being able to coexist with somebody.
All right. Well, I think I have one more question for you.
Yeah, please.
I had this discussion with somebody a while ago. When it comes to basically tying yourself down with somebody else for the rest of your life, that is I don't know in terms of other animals how many animals really do this. Like we have
very few
marriage, right? So is this something that humans basically created for the convenience and the convenience of survivability, and emotional, I'm trying to think of the right word, but essentially we have marriage between two adults, right? A male and a female, in terms, for what we're talking about right now, at least the two of us, right? Male and female. And if you're able to emotionally be with that person for the rest of your life, but is that actually a good enough, no, not good enough. Is like, what if marriage didn't last the rest of your life? Like, what if it was more like, I don't know, until the point that your children are 18 years old, something like that, or something random.
Oh, so like, the idea of marriage isn't to be with somebody for the rest of your life, and you knew that from the get-go.
I guess. I don't know if I know exactly how I want to ask this question, but I just feel like marriage is kind of a social construct that we created as humans.
It absolutely is. There's very few animals, species out there that are monogamous.
Yeah.
Because the entire idea of life, right, is fitness. It's the passing your genes on to the next generation to ensure the survival of your species. We've already won that. We're well beyond whether or not saber-toothed tigers are one winter away from winning this game. You know?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah. The more I think about it, though, the more I feel like maybe it is totally fair for marriage to be lumped in there, though, because, again, the word adult is something that we've created in order to fit a certain, a variety of circumstances or situations, whether it's a legal adult or a biological adult. The word adult is probably very vague, and it has there are many different people in many different ages that fit the term adult. And so I guess for you to be able to include marriage in there, or at least emotional attachment with one another, with another person, should be totally fair. So I'm not gonna knock you on it at all. I've changed my mind.
You changed your mind?
I've changed my mind. I'm not gonna include it in mine, but I'm not gonna knock you for it either. Like I think it's totally fair for you to have it.
Yeah, I think it's I think for me, I'm equating this type of relationship with, not directly, I'm not saying that marriage is the same thing as childhood or raising a kid.
Right.
But I think it's that, responsibility of another person. Knowing that you no longer make decisions purely based on yourself.
Yeah.
Right? It's also now accounting other people. And maybe it's just a higher level adult, right? Because, like you said, you can totally be an adult and never be with anybody because that was your own personal choice.
Yeah.
And you would never be any less of an adult because you decided either not to be with somebody or not to have kids. Like, all these are personal decisions.
Yeah.
But I think that you definitely don't get knocked for doing it. I think the exact opposite happens. It's if you decide to have a kid or to be with somebody, that there are even more responsibilities now that you are undertaking.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to read one last thing.
Okay.
The lessons that this one person, Williams Brown, broke down the lessons she's learned about adulthood into 3 categories: taking care of people, taking care of things, and then taking care of yourself. I guess there's 2 things. First thing, an anonymous person wrote this, was, adulthood is like a fish glittering in the water. You know it's swimming around there, and you can reach out and maybe touch it, but to catch it would destroy everything. And the moments when you do catch it, when you have to attend a brother-in-law's funeral or euthanize a paralyzed pet, you grasp it and you do it fully and well, but you long to toss it back in the pond. Then blast David Bowie and sit on the grass contentedly, watching adulthood glint in the sunlight. Then lean back and sigh, relieved that, for today at least, it doesn't concern you. So that's sort of a more distant relationship with adulthood, right?
Right.
Like, every day, you might be an adult, you might not. You're a tree, you're a sapling, it doesn't really matter. But every once in a while, you do engage with the more quote-unquote adult aspects of life. There's a beautiful piece of writing that Julie ends the article with. What adulthood means in a society is an ocean fed by too many rivers to count. It can be legislated, but not completely. Science can advance understanding of maturity, but it can't get us all the way there. Social norms change. People opt out of traditional roles or are forced to take them on way too soon. You can track the trends, but trends have little bearing on what one person wants and values, right? Society can only define a life stage so far. Individuals still have to do a lot of the defining themselves. Now, this is an amazing sentence. Adulthood altogether is an impressionist painting. If you stand far away enough, you can see a blurry picture, but if you press your nose to it, it's millions of tiny strokes. Imperfect, irregular, but indubitably part of a greater whole. So it's like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, if you stand back a second, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and you look at adulthood at a high level, you're like, yeah, I know what an adulthood looks like. You might not be able to fully describe it, but in your heart of hearts, you're like, I know what an adult is.
Right.
And I'm confident in my definition and understanding of adulthood. But when you sit down and actually analyze it, right, there's so many things that go in, and who are you to say what goes in and what stays out?
Right.
And what you decide is an adult can be drastically different than what mine is. But that doesn't mean that either of ours is wrong.
Right.
Isn't that crazy? Like, it's just that it's more of a, like, adulthood is a spectrum.
Yeah.
That's wild. To me, not only is that a major takeaway, it's also that I always thought that the growing up, you know, the getting a job, moving away, finding a partner, and then living on your own, having a kid, all those things, every generation did that. And when I found out that it was only the baby boom generation who got it so easily, quote unquote, and how much that has affected our society for the past 60 years, I found that incredible.
Yeah.
Because all of our parents, right, there's always that pressure that they give us, like, when are you going to grow up? When are you going to start, you know, becoming an adult and making these adult decisions? Like, wait a second, your sample size is, on the whole, totally abnormal, you know? And what you think is normal is actually highly unique in the ease in which you were able to attain these things. And maybe because and when I say some of us, I mean the royal us, right? Haven't attained the exact thing that you want, you should realize that, hey, you guys were taught by a generation that experienced something truly unique, right? It was a coming together of so many unique variables that we haven't seen since, and arguably might not see again. They're still the greatest generation, though. Oh my God, they're still the greatest generation. I'm not going to go into that, but they're by far the greatest generation we'll ever see. But that's just the history side of me coming out. Yeah, so, well, I'm glad that we had this discussion, though.
Yeah, it was fun.
When I read this article, I knew I had to share it with you because I knew you'd get a kick out of it.
Yeah, it was a good one.
I think that's it.
All right, well, everybody, I'm Reza.
I'm Sandy.
Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Take care, guys.